Hello. I'm Catherine Bertini. I'm the 2003 World Food Prize laureate, and we have this wonderful table or panel of laureates here to share thoughts for the next 45 minutes. So it's a real pleasure to introduce everybody, and I want to get their years correct. That Jan, who just spoke to you, is the 2016 World Food Prize laureate. Shakuntala is the 2021 World Food Prize laureate, and Heidi is the 2023 World Food Prize laureate. And as somebody said earlier, once upon a time there weren't many. I think the first woman was from Mexico and was the laureate in the 1990s. And then afterward, JWLOW followed when I was the laureate, and then eventually the prize started recognizing more women, and in fact for the last 3 years the laureates have all been women. Somebody said, gee, 3 women in a row. I said, oh, how many men in a row did we have earlier? So here we are with some thoughts about things we learned that we might be able to share in our own journeys in this area. So when we think about that, we started with issues about sharing impactful moments or projects that empowered us on our journey toward alleviating global food security. And so it'll be best for us to start. Each of us are going to share for about 3 minutes some thoughts so we can keep going and then ultimately come to your questions. So with that, how were you empowered to begin with? Heidi, would you start us off?
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, just to say how honored I am to be on the stage with these fellow women laureates. You know, my grandmother McNear would always tell me, coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. And as I stand on this stage, having received the World Food Prize last October, the theme was harness change. And when I spoke to the incredible Mashal Hussein at the beginning of this year, very saddened what was happening in the world, I said, how can I help harness change? And as 2 women, 2 mothers, we really gave birth to this idea, but not without men. Ambassador Kenneth Kühn, Ambassador Branstad, and many shoulders we stood on to be here today. We are in this venue that actually was envisioned by Senator Vance Hartke. His son and grandson are here today. And has served on my board of directors for 20 years. So if I've seen further than others, it is only because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And again, with gratitude to all those giants, especially the women in this room who really are behind the scenes. I'd just like to call them out by name. Alyssa, if you could raise your name. There's so many to count here. Nicole, and of course Mashal, but so many behind the scenes making this happen. So also too, I think it's just important standing here on the grounds of our nation's capital. You know, over our shoulders, we see the beautiful cherry trees. The cherry trees were donated by the mayor of Tokyo in 1914, actually 1912. 2 years later, exactly, to the date this week, Norman Borlaug was born. So he was a man of trees, he stood for substance, and I think what we are standing and observing on this stage is the beautiful cherry trees in contrast to the seeds of destruction caused by landmines, and 27 years ago began with a vision of turning mines into vines, and again, the antithesis of the beautiful cherry trees we see over our shoulders. May it inspire us here today to truly turn mines into vines, blood into wine, and killing fields into vineyards and cherry trees worldwide.
Thanks very much. Thanks. We've heard, especially from the last panel, about some of the challenges that women have had in moving through scientific careers and in becoming champions ultimately themselves. So, Shakuntala, maybe you could talk about this issue about in your work, what are some of the challenges that you've faced that might have been impacted by your gender and how you overcame them?
Well, I'd like to begin with, first of all, thank you, Catherine, and thanks to the World Food Prize Foundation for having me in this panel. When we talk about gender, I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and for my first schooling, until I went to university, I went to a girls' missionary school. And there you didn't think about what gender you were. You thought about that you were a person and that you had to do your best for yourself and at the same time for others. So sometimes I have to think actively about this, because when I look at myself in the mirror, I do not identify myself as much as being a woman as being a person. So I think that's important. And if we look at the population of the world, we are nearly even, women and men. And if we do not work together and help each other and work together meaningfully, then we cannot get meaningful change. So that's extremely important. In my work, what has been difficult, and as we've heard today, we talk about women who feed the world, who work in food, and we talk only about land. We talk only about farmers. And in my research and in the work I do, I work with water systems, aquatic foods, and aquatic foods are not just salmon or tilapia. There are thousands and thousands of diverse aquatic foods, and we must bring this into our discussions on food systems and transforming food systems for nourishing both people and planet. And in doing so, that means we must bring in women who are engaged in aquatic food systems. And if you would look around, many women glean in the marine systems and in inland water bodies. And this is an important part of feeding their families with nutritious foods. I'm very happy when we heard the discussions before, someone mentioning that we should be doing more research, more work on reducing loss and waste. And this is extremely important because aquatic foods, many of them are perishable foods, and therefore there's a large loss and waste. And if you know, you've worked with this, Catherine, if we would lose this, then we would not have the pressure on the production systems and the inputs for production. So reducing loss and waste is extremely important as we move forward. And there are many ways we can do this. And women who are in food systems know so much, for example, about preservation, about keeping food safe, even when they lack cold storage, lack freezers and refrigerations. So by bringing them in together with men, we can do so much more. Something I fear with the progress we are making, we are moving forward with new technologies, data technologies, with artificial intelligence, I do fear that we will lose all that we have with traditional knowledge and practices. And many of the traditional knowledge and practices are stored with women. And that's stored in the form of history, stories, in different languages. So if we do not together find a way to combine new technologies and the data technologies with traditional practices and traditional knowledge, and bringing in both women and men from all parts of the food systems, then I do not see how we can move forward meaningfully to transform food systems to nourish both people and planet.
Thank you. You know, when you mentioned the issue of food lost and waste, it was just the last panel where someone pointed out that it would be the third largest country if you collected all food lost and waste and assigned it to a national level. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. Jan, can we circle to the issue of so many people in the room and perhaps who listen to this discussion later, who are looking for opportunities in this area, who are aspiring leaders, and what kind of advice would you give to them about their own career paths in food, agriculture, nutrition?
Well, I think the good news is that I think the career paths are much broader now than they were a decade ago because of the interest and the growing interest in the transformation of the food system. So it's an exciting time to go into this area. Clearly, I think in most of our lives, we've had good mentors trying to find people to mentor you in a particular area of interest. And I would always encourage people to find an area of specialization, something you develop an expertise in, that you have a special skill to offer in an area of interest that you would be in. And then I think probably most people know this, but sometimes you aren't aware when you go into a new organization, figure out the internal politics and how you're going to negotiate those internal politics. And I've always found in some of the agricultural organizations, I think that's changing now, but they do tend to be dominated by men. Create your own sisterhood and build that sisterhood and don't be just competing against each other, but have a consultative approach to working with each other. Because I can tell you throughout one's career, one sometimes needs to draw on that sisterhood to get through some difficult periods.
Thanks. When we talked earlier, one of the issues that we spoke about was how do you make lasting change if you're working toward problems and issues and challenges that include being inclusive of women and men. This was certainly discussed in the last panel, but I wanted to share a couple of thoughts myself about my own experiences. I want to tell you about 3 quickly, and some of you will be bored having heard these stories before, but my advice to people who want to make a lasting change is, first of all, in whatever area that you're in, whether it's agriculture, nutrition, health, food, that you start by defining your mission. And I believe in most of the areas in which any of us are working, once we define the mission, we will end up finding the critical role of women and girls within that mission. That's what we did at the World Food Program when we started defining our mission, because we were moving food from point A to point B to point C, but we weren't defining why it was we were doing that. And so we said, what are really we trying to do? And the answer was, we're trying to end hunger. Somebody said, well, you can't end hunger in the whole globe. I said, well, no, if one organization could do that, it would be done already. But we're going to end hunger in the areas in which we are going to prioritize, in which we are going to concentrate. And once we said our mission was to end hunger, then the answer was not moving food from point A to point B to point C. The answer was, who is going to actually end hunger once we get the food there? And what's the answer to that? Women. Women and girls. In virtually all of the global south, that was the answer. So that made it be a rationale that everybody understood. That is what we need to do, is to reach women, because they are the cooks. We need to reach the cooks. We need to reach the people that are finding the firewood, the people that are finding the water. Oh, those are girls. So all of a sudden, we knew we had to focus on women and girls. So we had to listen to them. What do they need? What kind of food do they need at what time? What kind of nutrition do they need at what time? When do we get it to them, and in what form? And once we had to listen to women, we realized we didn't have anywhere near enough women on our staff to be able to listen to those women, because in so many cultures, it's impossible for a strange man to sit down talking to a group of women. So we had to have more women on our staff. We went from 17% to 39% in the 10 years that I was at WFP. Now it's much higher, but that was a major move. We had no women on the senior staff, and now clearly there are many more. But those are the kind of things that we needed to do. And to this day, every once in a while, I get a note from somebody that says, I got started because of you, because you hired me, because you promoted me. And one time, even recently, Cindy McCain sent me a picture of her with a driver in Kenya. And the driver had told her that she got her job because we opened job categories to women. And so it multiplies many times over. That was the WFP experience. Here in the US government, I was once Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, and I was responsible, among other things, for the WIC program. Well, on one hand, the WIC program is distributing information and food to poor women in the US. On the other hand, HHS is telling the women who are pregnant and to get ready because they should be breastfeeding when they have those babies. But we're giving out free formula at the WIC program. So it was easy to ask the question. After I walked through WIC myself, I said, okay, I'm a young mother. I have a 1-year-old who I'm breastfeeding. I made all this up. But I walked through the system and found out that I was going to give up all of these cartons of free formula because I was breastfeeding. That's kind of the wrong incentive to send me, while we know that the best thing to do is to breastfeed my baby. So I said, well, what do you need? What kind of nutrients does a breastfeeding woman need? And of course the nutritionist said, well, this, and this. Well, what kind of food is that in? Well, this, and this. Well, let's ask Congress to change the package so that we have a package for breastfeeding mothers. Oh, we don't have to ask Congress. The Secretary of Agriculture has the authority to do that. We did it, and it exists still today in the WIC program, and it's an important part of it. But again, the question was, what's the mission? The mission is to help mothers, to help poor mothers, and that includes to help them with the right kind of advice, in this case, that they should be breastfeeding their child if that's at all possible. And then finally, my third story, I wouldn't tell this story if it wasn't already in the book that Melinda Gates wrote about, titled A Moment of Lift. I was on the staff of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation early on during their tenure in getting into agriculture. And I went to a meeting with Bill and Melinda and others, and I was introduced as the senior fellow who was helping on several issues, including gender. Well, that provoked Bill to say, oh, I don't want to listen to this equal opportunity PC talk. And first I went back in my chair and thought, oh my, why am I here? But then I just sat up straight and said that his mission, as I understood it, was to increase agriculture production in Africa and South Asia, and that if that was his mission, that he needed to pay attention to who were the farmers, because whatever kind of inputs he was going to make, he had to make them around what their needs were. And if he just goes to meeting, the people with the agency to come to meetings to talk to him are men. But if one day he looked out the window as he was driving around in any country and pay attention to who are the farmers, he'd quickly see that the majority of the farmers he'd see in the field are women. But they're not at his meetings, and they don't have a voice to tell him what they need. So he's got to figure out a way to listen to their voices if he's going to make a difference in his objective, which was to increase agriculture production and opportunities. So those are a few examples around pay attention to the mission. What's your mission? Because you will find a way to define women and girls in that mission.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. answer.
Heidi, you have a story about mission, too, I think.
Well, to answer your question, the aha moment came for me in September 1997, when I realized we live in a world where there's an estimated 110 million landmines in 60 countries. As a mother of 4 children, I could not imagine a child kicking a soccer ball out of bounds or not having the ability to hike a mountain or run a beach without the fear of landmines beneath your feet. And the aha moment, when you think of young girls out getting water at the well or gathering firewood, they would blow up if in a mine-ridden country. And that's 1/3 of our country, our world today. So I got into the agricultural world and realm in a very different path. I immediately went to the Napa Valley, where I'm from. I knew it was the harvest. Vintners who didn't have to worry about landmines. I approached them and asked them if they would help me. Robert Mondavi, Mienko Gergich, who you'll be hearing from his daughter Violet later, Tor Kenward and Eric Wente joined me in going to Ottawa to witness the signing of the Ottawa Treaty to ban landmines. And when they asked me, how much money do you have to do this? Landmine removal is very expensive. I didn't have a penny to my name. Persistence, as the Olympic speaker said, and having so many no's thrown at you and saying, you're just a mom, you just live in Marin, what can you do for world peace? Well, the first month of the new millennium, I walked my first minefield in Croatia, and anything you could read in a paper would never give you the experience when they ask you your blood type, and then you take that footstep and not being able to trust the earth beneath your feet. I came back and I was passionate, really about making a difference. I'm a cancer survivor, and to me, cancer is a landmine, and it affects everyone on the earth. And so Mike Gergich, Mienko Gergich, who just passed away just this last December, said, I will go with you. I was born in Croatia. And I walked my minefield with him, along with my 13-year-old daughter, Kylie, whose birthday, and it was a rite of passage as a woman because I didn't want her to grow up in a privileged society thinking that there are children around the world who cannot do what she does, who the latest pair of blue jeans doesn't define what a young woman is. She came back to school, started a penny campaign, 1 penny at a time, and raised 50 million pennies to build schools for girls in Afghanistan. From Croatia, we moved to Afghanistan, and today, to fast forward it, Roots of Peace, with support from USAID, USDA, DOD, European Union, and the Asian Development Bank, has planted over 7 million fruit trees in all 34 provinces. And those fruit trees are bearing fruit today, feeding children in a country, again, 80% dependent upon agriculture for jobs, and conversely, one of the most heavily mined countries in the world. Now, oftentimes I feel like I'm going backwards because we look at Ukraine. 30% of Ukraine is now mined. 30% of a country that was once known as the breadbasket of Europe. So I think this is, I agree, a pivotal moment. As women, we bear the seeds of life, and it is our responsibility in this beautiful venue of the U.S. Institute of Peace to take action. From my perspective, to remove these deadly seeds of landmines from the face of this earth is the preamble for planting peace through agriculture. But as we plant every tree, not only does it grow fruit, but it sequesters carbon so we can fight climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a business model for peace: demine, replant, rebuild. And when I was so honored to be here from Washington, D.C., that I was the recipient of the World Food Prize, The ambassador here, if he would raise his hand, Ambassador Ibrahim and Ambassador, you called it Ambassador Randstad and Ambassador Ibrahim, I was demining in Karabakh. So that's what women do. We take out landmines, we make the land safe for our children. I hope you'll join me for a landmine-free world. That's how we start to plant peace through agriculture.
We're going to intersperse with some questions from the audience, and one of them is, what can the private sector do to address assistance with food insecurity issues? Shakuntala, would you like to take a crack at that?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Catherine. And we've been hearing, and you've mentioned, and before us, about moving forward in order to nourish people and the planet. We all are working towards the transformation of the food systems, and that's many sectors. So there are also important roles for the private sector, not for any one sector independently, but together. Just take the examples you gave of school feeding programs, mother and child health care programs, safety net programs. These are the biggest procurement programs of food which feed people in many countries. The governments run these programs, but they cannot run these programs without working together with the private sector in order to get the food, many times in the forms that can reach the schools, that can reach public health care sectors, because they have to be in forms that can be preserved, that can stay long, and that are convenient for use. So that's an example of how the private sector can work together in transforming food systems, not on their own, but together with governments and with communities.
Thank you. Jan, can we circle back to our original question about how you got into this business? I mean, what convinced you wanted to go into this work, and what empowered you to do it?
Well, I think actually it's in terms of getting into the agricultural area. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, in an urban area, so I think what had actually inspired me to get interested in going into agriculture was my background in science as an undergraduate, and I did a Peace Corps experience in Zaire in fisheries, which made me realize that I enjoyed working with farmers and local people in an extension activity. So I sort of came through that sort of back door, not growing up in an agricultural area, as most Americans don't, and getting into it through the ability to participate in the Peace Corps, which was a great program. So I think that, but I think in terms of getting into research, it was really being exposed in my graduate studies to nutrition as well as agriculture that made me very interested in integrating nutritional concerns into agricultural development. And I had the opportunity to do my postdoctoral degree with the International Potato Center, which is where I developed the interest and promoted the vitamin A sweet potato. But there was a period of time, really when I was trying to do the research or fund the research, get the funding for the research to be able to prove that using an integrated agriculture nutrition approach, we could make a difference to vitamin A deficiency, which was evidence needed for the nutrition community. And it really took persistence, as Heidi was saying, because I was working in another job as a policy advisor, but I wanted to do this research for a long time. And vacations and periodically, I basically spent over 3.5 years going to 21 different donors with a proposal before I could find somebody to fund to fund my research work in central Mozambique. And it was that time period where the health people would say, no, this is a health proposal, go to the agricultural donors. The agricultural donors would say, no, this is really health, go to the health people. And nutrition often is lost in between the two sectors. So I think the world has changed quite a bit now because there's a lot more multi-sectoral activity. But to get that breakthrough, and it was the Micronutrient Initiative in Canada, if there's any Canadians out there that finally saw the light and was willing to support integrated ag nutrition research. So I guess it was saying, going back to the thing in your area of interest, you have your mission, you have your goal, there's something you want to do. Don't give up when you get the first no, because there will be many no's in your life. But if you have the feeling that you're right, you may just be a little ahead of your time in getting something financed.
The Canadian government is a good example of a government who for many years kept pushing on issues that other governments weren't talking about.
The Ottawa Treaty to ban landmines. Lloyd Axworthy.
And certainly all the micronutrient issues and a lot of issues around nutrition, they were in the forefront of that.
Yes.
Yep. So climate's been mentioned on this panel, it's been mentioned by others. And so one thing we might think about, and in part from a question from the audience, do we have examples of the positive connection of programs to address climate and agriculture at the same time? Shakuntala, you referred to this before, and certainly you see it right up front in your work constantly. Can you give some positive examples of how agriculture and climate mitigation can work together?
Thank you, Catherine. If we begin with where many are today, and this is just recent, starting with the UN Food Systems Summit in 2021, and we've had the follow-up +2. In 2025, we'll have the follow-up +4, and this is at the global level. But we've moved beyond that, knowing that actions, both in transforming food systems and in mitigating the issues we have with climate change, reaching food security, these actions can only take place at national level. And therefore, governments are important in laying down the policies, in getting the investments, the funding, putting in place the research, and bringing together communities at the table for decision making. So it's extremely important we have all these parts together. And we saw last year at COP28 that for the first time, it just started in COP26, so 2 years ago, where everyone now understands that in moving forward, there must be integration of climate change and food and nutrition security, transformation of food systems. They must encompass both. And one of the parts of solution is looking at water systems. And we have, in the CGIAR, we have moved forward with our agenda, with our strategy. Our mission is to transform food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. So I do think we are moving forward and working together with partners and governments on this mission. And in doing so, if we do not bring in the ocean, foods from the ocean, how we support and how we protect the oceans, and if we do not take into considerations inland water bodies, just take Africa and the importance of the Great Lakes of Africa. If we do not have this also as part of transforming food systems, then we are missing out on all the opportunities we have of transforming food, land, and water systems to nourish people and planet. For a concrete example, just look at seaweed. When I look at the nutritional composition of foods, there is no food in terms of micronutrient quality that can beat seaweed. Just no food. It's a superfood. And if you talk in terms of seaweed for climate and for taking into consideration climate, there is, again, no system that's as good as the seaweed systems that are in the oceans.
Thanks. I have a proposal that I'm trying to pass out, so I take advantage of this question to say it here. Girls, as we know in so many communities, are the collectors of firewood and water. It would be great if some organizations, NGOs or others, actually went into business with these girls, or at least gave them some kind of cash to be the environmental stewards in their community. Think about this, in rural communities, who knows more about the issues of water and timber than girls? Because they're the ones going out having to bring that water in every day, so they know what the rivers are like and when they're going dry and when they're in good shape enough to get decent water out of them. Girls are the ones that have to go further and further away in order to get firewood to bring back for the family. They know the status of the forest. So why not take advantage of all this knowledge from all these people in different communities to help advise on the status, help keep track of what's happening with the water, keeps track of what's happening with the potential firewood, and then report that back into a system that will help do something about both cases and help work to improve the local
Yes, Catherine, those are two very good examples, and using the knowledge that are with women and girls. And just think, these are two areas where private sector can get engaged with using solar energy.
Yes.
We can hit hard on those two sectors that you've just named, collecting firewood and water, by using solar power.
You're nodding. Do you have
yes,
to add something?
Well, I'm in full agreement. By land, by sea, we're gonna take this on. But I'm proud today to announce, I've been given the permission to, that Roots of Peace has just been appointed by Dr. Carrie Fowler as a VAX champion, and that is VAX for the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soil. And so what am I going to do with the championship? Just like what was I going to do with the award? Well, we have taken it to the field already in Afghanistan for the past 22 years. And again, with climate change, we are actively working in Afghanistan, the longest consecutively working organization. And I do want to bring the fact that we're working with women. This is so vitally important. Not only providing the, the irrigation, the solar energy, but we are going into their homes because obviously it is a very restricted de facto authority. I'll just call it the regime that they're under. But we cannot turn our backs on these women and how much they need us right now. We're bringing kitchen gardens inside of the home. When they have to go outside because of a mahram, a male father or brother or relative to take them out, what we're doing is going inside of the home. We're bringing baby chicks, for instance. Here's innovation. The chicks grow into chickens, the chickens lay eggs, the protein from the eggs are able to feed the children, And because the women cannot go out, the husbands go to market and they sell those eggs. They come back home and they treat their wives with a little bit more respect. So, you know, I just would again like to thank my country. We're currently managing the funds from U.S. Department of State, INL, International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. And a very important fact of Afghanistan, again, with climate change and the importance of planting trees. With reduced funding, we've only been able to do 80,000 trees this spring, but that's 80,000 trees with the ability to sequester the carbon. But the eradication of poppies is an opportunity. Let me say and explain that, because in April 2022, the current regime banned poppy production. Now that leaves areas wide open, relatively the size of the state of Delaware. But this is an opportunity to plant those high value crops. Again, how does it help with climate? Because it's sequestering the carbon, but providing the fruits. And when people can feed their families and not join nefarious other organizations because they're starving to death, you know, this is a way to provide literally the roots of peace, to really create sustainable agriculture, opportunities for jobs, and again, solve the food security issue as well as addressing climate change. So.
Thanks, Heidi. We have 4 minutes left, and I'm going to turn to Jan with a question from the House, but I'd like to ask that question and one broader question or statement maybe. How do we elevate role models and mentors to meet our goals? Jan, I'd love to address this, but also I think in the context as we close, we need to include something about the ongoing issue of girls' education and being sure that we give opportunities to girls. The Olympic speaker this morning was so compelling about this, not necessarily about what you do in 6th grade, but how important her broader education was to her work. And so maybe if we could combine those things in a few final thoughts.
Okay, well, I think you hit on a very important point here in the sense that there's obviously in the agriculture research sector, there's a lot of excitement about digital tools, the potential positive use of artificial intelligence. But then when you go back and you're working in the field, in some of the areas we work, we have such high levels of illiteracy, particularly among women in some of these areas. Who's really going to be able to benefit from these tools? And it gets back to basic education, doesn't it? People need to see the role models in their countries, in their context of their religious group, achieving higher education. Because if we don't get literacy and numeracy into the educational programs, we're starting at a real deficit as we move forward. And I've worked a lot over the years in community-based nutrition education and ag programs, and realizing that now what is really needed is to get nutrition education as a life skill into primary and secondary schools, and many of these basic life skills into that. So not only is it literacy, but key life skills, so we aren't playing catch-up all the time. And how do we get those, elevate those role models and mentors to meet those needs? We need I think that's where programs for developing advocates and a more positive use of social media for positive role models could come into play, but let's not escape the value in many of our countries of more effective use of radio and those systems. So I think there's a lot we could do to support leadership, and training programs are already out there for science and STEM, but they need to be expanded. And it was really exciting to hear about the work that Wanda is doing.
Yes, absolutely. And also, when we listened to Ndidi in one of the earlier programs, she talked about the vast difference between women and men in terms of their productivity and how much money they made in their small enterprises in Nigeria. I think it was Nigeria. But it's important to think about the role of education there. Because, gee, if you don't know how to count, you can't really pay very much attention to the rows that you're planting. If you don't know how to read, you can't read the packaging for what you might be needing in terms of your inputs, and it makes a huge difference for farmers. And IFPRI said years ago that women are more likely to follow other women farmers. So if there are enough educated women farmers, it will actually raise all boats for all women. It would make a huge difference. Recently, I heard a speech by the ambassador of the EU to the US, and he led with, "What's so scary about smart girls?" And if you ever hear him be able to have the opportunity for hear him talk, I strongly recommend it. He used to be the EU Human Rights Commissioner, and he has a brilliant speech about why Taliban or ISIS or anyone else is putting women down, and why it's important to bring women up, because it changes countries and it builds democratic systems. It was a really strong statement. So whether we're talking about agriculture, nutrition, health, environment, or even democracy, we have to put high on the list education of girls.
I'll say a quick one. I would like to just go back to Dr. Borlaug. It's all about the farmer, and let's hit the women farmers in Afghanistan. Maybe they can't go to school, but we can sure educate them in agribusiness, and the neighbors see it, the communities, and it feeds the husbands and boys, the future generation.
And that's what one of the other Nobel laureates used to talk about, does still talk about, Muhammad Yunus, Nobel laureate and World Food Prize laureate, because he said he invested in women. He gave his loans to women. They were more likely to pay them back than men. And when they invested their newfound resources, they were much more likely to invest those resources in the family. So,
and education and food.
And?
Education and food.
And food. So, any other 15-second thoughts?
Nailed it.
Otherwise, we want to thank you for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for coming to this first World Food Prize event like this in DC. And thank the World Food Prize leadership and staff for bringing us together and putting this on. Thank you.